Marvelous. We're now officially recording, so we didn't forget that this time. So, hey, welcome back, everybody. Or at least most of you came back. All right, so yes, as I indicated in my email yesterday, the hastily canceled class last week, I was fighting what I thought was just a seasonal cold. And the last Tuesday, I got slammed pretty hard. And last Wednesday morning, they sent me for a COVID test. And by Saturday, it had come back positive. So last week, I was rough. I was in no condition to be seen even on Zoom. The good news is that, for the last day or two, I've been, other than a residual cough, and you might hear me start to hack and spasm here, but I'm no longer contagious in any way. I'm out of school the rest of this week, but I'm cleared to return after Friday. So everything seems to be progressing in the right direction. What they don't tell you is when you test positive, you spend about 6 hours on the phone because your school district calls you, your HR person calls you, your nurse calls you, the doctor calls you, the board of health calls you. I talked to everybody except Rachel Levine herself. And so everybody wants to know who you're around and contact trace and all that nonsense. So the really frustrating thing for me is I did everything right. I mean, I got to be honest, my wife and I haven't left Lancaster County since March. We didn't travel anywhere. We canceled all our trips. Wear a mask everywhere I leave the house. I did all the stuff they tell you to do to avoid getting, and I got it. I'm guessing maybe from somebody at school, but I honestly don't know. So it's just one of those things. And it's weird because my symptoms, my wife's symptoms, radically different. So you don't even know with this thing. So stay as safe as you can. Like I said, the good news is there are a lot of people that had a much more serious case of this thing than I did. And so I'm very, very fortunate in that regard. I don't know if it's just luck of the draw or genetics or I have super blood. I don't know. So anyhow, we're back at it here. Now, a couple of things that occurred to me over the last week. Of course, I sent that email last Wednesday. It was either late morning or early afternoon. And it's apparent that given your hectic schedule, a lot of you don't check email frequently because, I was hearing from you at like 6:10, 6:15. I can't get on the Zoom. What's going on? In a virtual learning environment, checking email as often as possible is absolutely important. It's the way the world communicates. I know a lot of you guys that are younger, your generations, everything's Insta tweet and snap to chat and all those other things, and you text and so forth. But the adult world is email, and so just check that. I mean, all the time. I might email you 3 times in a week. I might not send an email for a month, but that seems to be the way to kind of bridge the gap between classes. Some of you indicated that you had tech issues with the quiz last week. I've reopened last week's quiz through, I think, tomorrow night. So you have, another opportunity. I changed the settings. So if you're somebody that said, hey, I submitted or it submitted me automatically in the middle of my quiz, or if you had some other issue, you have another submission to use. So you should be able to go back in and redo that. If you have some kind of other issue, when we're done tonight, hang around on the Zoom and we'll try to walk through it together. But I'm trying to accommodate you guys in every possible way, A, because this whole virtual thing is still relatively new, and B, because I bailed on you last week. Now, it was initially my intent last week that, hey, go through the Grease PowerPoint, watch that video, still keep up with the reading, like, hey, we're not going to miss a beat, but that doesn't seem very realistic because I actually do want to talk with you about Grease a little bit. So we might just kind of bump everything a week. We have a little bit of a luxury in that I always build in some extra time later on where I spend, I schedule something for an entire class and I don't only take part of the time. So, we can do that and not lose any content. How many of you would, just by like waving your hand at me, how many of you 100% kept up with the assigned reading, watched the video, and looked at the PowerPoint I asked you to look at just like we were in class together? Okay, like 5 of you, maybe 6. Okay, all right. So, we might be able to cover some ground a little more quickly and branch into the India and China unit a little bit tonight. As I said in the email yesterday, there is no quiz tonight. I could not in good conscience give you a quiz when we didn't have class last week. And where is Deanna? I have your issue all resolved. That should be switched over for you by tomorrow. I'll be submitting that this evening. Okay. All right. So hopefully we're good to go on that front. Ralph, you with us?
Yes.
Okay. You heard what I said. If you want to hang around when we shut down tonight, just to kind of walk through and make sure we can take care of any of your tech issues with zip grade, but that should be set up for you to have another opportunity.
Is it gonna be today or tomorrow? Because
well, you'll have till tomorrow night. I'm just saying that if we want to kind of walk through it together to make sure tonight that everything works,
oh yeah, sure.
We'll do that. Okay. All right. So, anybody else have any questions about anything logistically? So basically now what I will do is I will change the dates on everything and repost it on D2L. But for now, we're basically bumping everything for a week. So if you didn't for tonight read about China and India and Brahmanism and Jainism and Hinduism and Buddhism and Confucianism, make sure you do that for next week. And if you did, maybe skim back over it. Next week's quiz will be almost entirely on Greece unless we collectively discuss stuff tonight having to do with the other. All right, does that help everybody kind of reset everything here? At this time, take a couple minutes and just put something in the chat so I can account for you. I've been trying to take a screenshot with my camera. The problem is that some people, because they keep getting bumped out, have to come back in. Some people end up coming in late. So just as a matter of course, every single night we have class, you get an at least type of greeting in, because I'll use that to account for everybody's attendance. Because when I kind of did it, like the first or second night, I was trying to do it as we were going along. And if somebody came in late or I missed someone, that didn't work out. So this will be a little more accurate. We good? All right, so let's talk about ancient Greece a little bit. And even before I pull up the PowerPoint, I want to talk a little where I can kind of see people and feel engaged. Where does Greek civilization begin? Everybody forgets the reading from 2 weeks ago. Geographically, does it begin in Italy? Does it begin in Asia Minor? Does it begin on the island of Crete? Yeah, the head's nodding now. Yeah, I remember now. Okay, it wasn't just that goofy side-eye Muppet look that Mayo just gave me. Yeah, the island of Crete and then the Mediterranean Sea. This is where Greek civilization really begins. And the Greeks begin to develop their culture on the island of Crete around 3000 BCE. It falls during the old kingdom of Egypt. And Crete is really interesting in its geographic location. It's kind of a crossroads. The Syrians, the Phoenicians that we talked about, the Egyptians, other people on the Greek peninsula, as they sent sailing ships to trade with other cultures, they came to the island of Crete. And so the culture that develops on Crete, called the Minoan civilization or Minoan civilization, flourishes very early because it has technology, it has resources, it has ideas that come from all these different and diverse elements around them. The Minoans on Crete, or the Minoans, and it is pronounced either way, are most famous for their very powerful King Minos, and the palace in which he lived. Anybody remember the name of that palace? It would have been in your reading. It was in the PowerPoint. I largely asked so that you can mispronounce it. The palace is called Knossos. It's K-N-O. It's usually S-S-O-S, but you don't pronounce the K. And this is a pretty remarkable structure. I'll tell you, kind of spoiler alert, civilization on Crete, the Minoan civilization, gets wiped out. And we're not really sure why. Best guess is some type of earthquake or volcano. There seems to be indication of fire, even on the Greek peninsula, some of the city-states. We've had archaeological digs at. When I say we, I just mean humans in general. I don't mean me. I don't go on archaeological digs. Seem to indicate that. But there was a palace. This palace of Gnosis was really fantastic. It was 4 stories tall, which, given the technology at the time, is really remarkable. It had a like a basement storage area, and the first and second floor were artisans, blacksmiths, potters, things like that. And then in the third and fourth floor is where the king and the royal family lived. And they even had bathrooms with running water. They had indoor plumbing. The washed away waste out into the sea, and it was really pretty sophisticated for the time. The civilization was pretty advanced. As far as the common people, they grew and cultivated olives, and they went fishing, and they engaged in trade with areas around them. Their primary export was olive oil, which they walked around rubbing all over their bodies. So they were these glistening, tan, fit-looking people, like something out of some kind of dream. They engaged in a lot of physical activities, including one called bull leaping, which is really fantastic, and I'm tempted to try, except for the fact that gravity would ruin it for me. But in bull leaping, they did this. It was kind of a challenge where you grabbed a bull by the horns on purpose. Okay, and when you did that, of course, the bull would start jerking his head away, trying to shake you off, and you used the momentum from the bull bringing his head up, and you flipped and vaulted onto his back and then off. And the ability to do this demonstrated a great deal of agility and strength. I don't doubt it. Failure to do it probably resulted in a great deal of large perforations in your body. But bull leaping is something that the civilization is really known for. And we'll actually see an artistic depiction of it here in our PowerPoint in a minute. But it would have been something I think really impressive to see. I'd like to see a reenactment. And I don't know, maybe if you travel to Crete, they do those bull leaping reenactments. I don't know. And so there's this Minoan culture. We know a lot about it because they took a great deal of time to make murals depicting life on Crete. And in these archaeological digs, a lot of that stuff survives. So I want to walk through a little bit of this PowerPoint here now, so we can kind of revisit some of this and see some of this. You got Greece up in front of you?
Yes.
Yay, okay. All right, so we're talking about archaic Greece. We're going back to about 1500 BCE or so. And there you can see Crete. It shows where Gnosis was on the island of Crete. And then we see the Greek peninsula, or sometimes called the Peloponnesian Peninsula, which is where the Mycenaean civilization will develop. And there is an artistic depiction of the palace of Gnosis. And you see, if we're talking, 1700, 2000 BCE, that looks pretty substantial and sophisticated. That's beautiful. I mean, it looks like a hotel you'd stay in if you traveled to Greece. There we see, this is bull leaping. You see somebody grabbing the bull by the horns, and then, they would flip up onto the back and vault off the back side. That looks pretty impressive. Obviously, being an island, civilization on Crete, we feature a lot of fish, dolphins, other sea life. Now, interestingly enough, if we go back, the interesting about Gnosis is that while it is beautiful and it's architecturally stunning, and you see there's a courtyard there in the middle, it doesn't really look fortified. There's not like a big stone wall around it. There does not seem to be any emphasis really on defenses. Why do you suppose that is?
By the sea.
Yeah, I mean, they're on an island. So obviously the chance that any entity is going to be able to land some large army on an island is slim to none. When you live on an island, you don't need a big army, or you don't need big thick walls. um, we see this later in different civilizations, whether it's Britain or certain other areas, that the protection of the sea is substantial. I want you to look at the figure on the left. It is believed that initially, like in ancient Minoan civilization, we're talking at the very, very beginning, back around 3000 BCE, that their deities were mostly female. Earth goddess, that is a female deity. And it was not until civilization developed a little further that they shifted to a male dominated pantheon of gods. And then there's an urn or a container there on the right with an octopus on it, again indicating the importance of the sea. But this goddess is significant because it seems that religions with female goddesses, I know that's redundant, female gods or goddesses, are generally more interested in art, in agriculture, and less interested in warfare. They're generally more peaceful and more artistic. And that does kind of feed into some stereotypes that we still maintain in our culture today, but it was true at the time. But by far the thing that is most associated, I think, with Minoan culture and civilization is the story of the Minotaur. So what's a Minotaur? Either you already know this or you can discern it from the picture. Have you ever heard of a Minotaur?
Man, half human.
Isn't it like a bull, like a bull-headed, like creature of some sort?
Yeah, it generally has, I'm going to say, the body of a man, although that's a pretty impressive man right there. Body of a man and the head of a bull. It's a big beastly creature. And there's a story out of Greek myth involving a hero named Theseus and the Minotaur. Now, look, with Egypt, we did pull in discussion of their gods and their mythology, and we'll do that with the Greeks even more so, because so much of our culture is built upon that. But the story of Theseus the Minotaur, each of these stories I share with you tonight from Greek myth has something really specific to say about Greek culture or Greek geography. Myths aren't things that people just make up. I know the word myth makes it sound that way, but the stories are tied to the culture, and they tell us something about the culture. We talked about that. We talked about Sept being such a jerk in Egyptian mythology. He's the god of the desert. The desert is cruel. The desert is harsh. So look, this Minotaur, this creature that does look pretty scary, lived in a labyrinth in the palace of Knossos. A labyrinth is a maze. King Minos of Crete, who had defeated the Greeks from mainland Greece and the Greek peninsula in a war earlier, had demanded that every 7 years, the Greeks sent a tribute of 7 young men and 7 young women that he would send into the labyrinth and sacrifice to the Minotaur. It's a tribute that was required of the losers of the war. Well, the one city ruled by King Aegeus, was getting ready to send these tributes, if it were. And for those of you that are fans of the Hunger Game books or Hunger Game movies, this sense of sending a tribute every so many years, comes from Greek legend. And Aegeus' son Theseus, who was a hero renowned throughout Greece, volunteered to go and said, look, it's not right we have to do this. I'm going to go and I'm going to kill the Minotaur. And his father begged him not to go. And I'm skipping some details from the beginning, the background of the story. But basically, Theseus said, I'm going to go along with the 7 young women and the other 6 young men, and I'm going to kill the Minotaur and free us from this tribute. And he told his father, look, we leave on a ship flying black sails because we're going to our death. But when I return, I will have white sails on board. And when you see my ship return with the white sails, you'll know that I am alive and we were successful and we were victorious. And they set off and they go. And they arrive, and there's a big celebration, a big banquet the night before the sacrifice for these tributes. And Theseus starts shooting off his mouth to King Minos of Crete that what you're doing is wrong, and I'm going to kill your Minotaur, and all this is going to be over, and just wait, you'll see. And of course, Minos gets really, really angry. And in the middle of the banquet, he calls the whole thing off, the banquet that is, and says, all right, tomorrow morning you're going to the Minotaur, and you're all going to die. Well, some people in Crete were so impressed by the bravery of Theseus. And one of them was Ariadne. She was the daughter of King Minos. And she decides she's fallen in love with Theseus. She goes to him in his cell, and she said, look, nobody's ever found their way out of the labyrinth. And the Minotaur has killed everyone who goes in there because they have trapped in there. And he said, here's a weapon you can take with you, and here's a ball of string. Tie it here at the entrance, and then you'll be able to find your way out after you kill the Minotaur. Theseus goes in the next day, and he kills the Minotaur. And he follows the string to get out, and he and his men get on their ship, and Ariadne says, I want to come with you, and they leave victorious. And so this is the legend of Theseus and the Minotaur. Unfortunately, they stop on an island on the way home to get some sleep, to rest before the next leg of their journey. They're sleeping on the beach, and somebody thinks they see sails of ships on the horizon, and this must be King Minos coming after them. So they hurry and they jump on the ship and they take off. And they leave Ariadne on the beach, the chick that saved them. They leave her there. Now they also, in their haste, forget to change the sails. So as Theseus' father, King Aegeus, is watching the horizon from a cliff, waiting to see the return of his son, he sees the ship and sees it still has the black sails, and decides that his son must have failed and his son is dead, so he jumps off the cliff and kills himself. And so this is our classic Greek tragedy. There's always this twist and this thing that goes wrong, but that's the story of Theseus and the Minotaur. The Minotaur crops up, by the way, in a lot of popular culture. If you have kids that read, or if you read when you were younger, the Percy Jackson books, the Minotaur in there. If you ever saw the very hilarious movie Role Models, they drive around a truck advertising an energy drink that's, looks like a Minotaur. Anyhow, that's that story. And that's kind of the big story that comes out of Crete before their civilization is destroyed in, whatever fire, earthquake, volcano might have done it. From there, we transition, pretty much chronologically, to Mycenaean civilization. Mycenaean is the mainland civilization that develops into Greek culture. And it's during this Mycenaean civilization that the Greeks come into conflict with the city-state of Troy, and we end up with an actual event theoretically around 1200 BCE called the Trojan War. You've heard of this, yes? Trojan War?
Mm-hmm.
What do you know about the Trojan War? Went back to the big screen here. Anybody know anything about the Trojan War?
Didn't they have that one horse? It was like a wooden horse they put soldiers in.
Yeah. This is the famous, Trojan horse, the wooden horse. We get all kind of things out of that.
They used no, never mind.
No?
No, I forgot. I think it was something. Was it guerrilla tactics? No.
No, they're actually the siege of Troy is a pretty straightforward thing. We'll get back to guerrilla tactics actually in a little bit. All right, so look, the Trojan War is such a great story from the mythological perspective, and then when you tie in the real actual battle and some of the strategy and early Bronze Age technology used, it's really fascinating. There have been a lot of books written about it and movies made about it, but yeah, I just want to share with you because of so much in our culture that comes from this. So here's the story, and let's actually I will screen share again because I want the map up. Yeah. Oh, there's our Trojan horse you brought up. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so over here on the coast of, this is what is Turkey today. It's sometimes called Anatolia or Asia Minor. Troy is here. City-states in Greece, the island of Ithaca, we have Athens, we have Sparta, we have Mycenae, we have all these other city-states. Okay, so here's the story. You know the names of some Greek gods, right? Zeus and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, and Poseidon and Hera, who's the sister of Zeus, but also his wife, because mythology. All right, so here's the story. I'm trying to set the stage for everything here. So there's a wedding up on Mount Olympus. This is mythological stuff. We're gonna weave in the real stuff too, but yeah. So this is story time. So pull up your carpet square and get comfortable. Okay. So once time there's this wedding, big wedding celebration at Mount Olympus. All the gods are up there, and the goddess Thetis was not invited. Okay, and she's the goddess of discord, and so she decides, fine, they didn't invite me. You know, I'm going to cause a ruckus, and she conjures up a golden apple, and on the golden apple it says, "To the most beautiful." And from behind a curtain, she just rolls it out into the middle of the wedding reception. And Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and Hera, the queen of the gods, wife of Zeus, they all see it about the same time. They start fighting over it. This is obviously intended for me, they each say. Okay. And so they decide, I don't know, we'll go to Zeus, king of the gods. Zeus, king of the gods. Who was this apple intended for? In other words, which of us is the most beautiful? Well, you don't get to be king of the gods by answering a question like that, because you know you're not, because Hera is your daughter, Aphrodite is your daughter, Hera is your wife and sister. You don't win in this. So he says, all right, I'll tell you what. I'm not going to answer that question, but there's a guy on earth. His name is Paris. He's a shepherd. He has a great reputation for settling disputes. Everybody agrees how fair and wise he is. Why do we let him decide? Because of his great reputation, and that way I don't have to. And this will be entertaining for us, the gods, to see what hijinks ensue. And so Paris is going to be charged with this task. Now, each of the goddesses in question are going to appear to Paris and try to bribe him. You know, Hera is first. She appears to Paris and she says, look, here's the deal. You got to choose which of us gets this golden apple. If you choose me, I can give you wealth beyond your wildest dreams. My brother is Hades. He's god of the earth. He controls gold and silver and everything mined from the earth, and you'll be wealthy beyond your wildest imagination if you choose me. And then Athena, goddess of wisdom, goddess of strategy and war, appears to him and says, look, if you choose me, you know, I'll make sure that you never lose a battle. Anytime you fight, you'll always be able to defend your family and your home. You know, that's my guarantee to you. You'll be the greatest military leader in the history of Greece. Then Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, appears to Paris. And all she does is touch his arm. And his blood boils. And he falls in love. And she says, you cannot have me because I am a goddess. But there is one on earth, they say, rivals me in beauty. And she is my gift to you if you choose me. And Paris says, here's the apple. Because men are weak. The Greeks knew this. Okay, if you're some half-naked, beautiful chick, you can get whatever you want out of a guy. That's a really sexist and terrible thing to say, but it's absolutely true. And so Paris gives her the apple. Okay, and so Aphrodite gets to claim she's the most beautiful now. And Paris goes off to find this girl named Helen, who he's been promised. And her name is Helen of Troy. She's known as the face that launched 1,000 ships. Because here's what nobody mentioned up to this point, including me. She is already married to the king of Sparta. And Paris shows up and says, hey, I'm from Troy, but the goddess Aphrodite promised me to you, so why don't we go back to my place? You can ditch your husband. And she does. And so Helen and Paris go back to the city-state of Troy. The king of Sparta has been robbed of his wife. And so all of Greece decides to go to war with Troy over this whole thing. And so Helen is known as the face that launched 1,000 ships, because eventually she was so beautiful that 1,000 warships left Greece and went to fight in the Battle of Troy. A war that's going to last 10 years. Troy is a city-state surrounded by a big wall that's absolutely impenetrable. For 10 years, the Greeks laid siege to the city, and there's epic battles involving guys named Achilles and Ajax and Hector and Ulysses, better known as Odysseus, actually. And they can't get in. So Odysseus has this great plan. Let's build a big wooden horse. Okay. Let's sail all our ships away and just have like 8 of us in this horse hidden inside. We'll leave a note that says a gift from Poseidon, the god of the sea, congratulating Troy on their victory. They'll drag it inside their city. They'll have a big celebration celebrating their win. And at night, while they're all drinking and partying, we'll sneak out and open the gates. Our ships will have come back. Our guys will march in and win. And that's exactly what happened. And so if somebody gives you something for nothing, and a friend of yours says, hey, beware of Greeks bearing gifts, that's what it comes from, and that's what it means. Okay, and so we get these references in our culture because of this story. Now, Odysseus then is the second half of this story. So the first half of the story I just told you is based on something called the Iliad. It's an epic poem written by a guy named Homer. It's a very famous poem that tells the story of the Trojan War. Okay. Odysseus then takes 10 years to get home because there was actually a prophecy that said that if he left to fight in the war, he'd be gone for 20 years, and in return, he'd be a penniless beggar that nobody recognized. And that story is even better than the Iliad. We'll see if we have time to throw it in at the end. And there's a replica of the wooden horse that's bigger than the real one actually was. This shows all these different city-states. Okay, by the way, what's the Greek word for city-state?
Polis?
Yeah, polis. Yeah, polis. We still use the word today in the names of cities like Indianapolis and Minneapolis. But all these different separate city-states. See, Greece wasn't one large country like this. It was a collection of these separate city-states. They all went to war then with Troy. And so that's the Trojan War or the Iliad. Homer, by the way, is this blind poet that after, a century of this story, these stories of battles and heroes and the Trojan War being passed down, writes down the story. And so it's what we have of it. It's 2 parts, the Iliad about the Trojan War and the Odyssey about the journey of Odysseus getting home. Agamemnon was one of the great war leaders of the Greeks in the Trojan War. And so after this Homeric period, this age of Homer, we're kind of we enter into what's called the kind of like the Greek Middle Ages. And they end about 700 BCE, and we end up in like kind of the golden age of Greece. Now, in Greek culture, it's a stratified society. There's the nobility that, just like the term would imply, in any culture, they have most of the land and most of the money, most of the power and the influence. And then you have, the different groups beneath them, artisans and laborers, what the Greeks called thetes, landless laborers, and then slaves. When we talk about slaves in ancient Greece, we're not talking about slavery like in North American history, like in American history. They were mostly women who were servants and sometimes men captured in war, but there was usually an expiration date on their servitude, and then they were freed. They weren't considered chattel or property so much. An important thing in Greek culture in this time were the values that they celebrated. And you see these values expressed in some of their myths and stories that we talk about yet. Physical prowess, strength, courage, the ability to protect family, friends, and property, personal honor and reputation. These are all things that, their stories in our culture revolve around. The greatest city-state in all of Greece was Athens. It is the greatest example of the polis, the city or city-state. Usually there's high ground, an acropolis. They would build a temple and other important buildings on it. There's an agora, an open air marketplace around it where people could gather to exchange commerce or to, just interact and talk about the issues of the day. Here we see Athens kind of set away from the coast, but they have a port city that belongs to them. Because again, being a peninsula, the sea is going to play a very important role in culture. The Athenians are the ones that kind of run the gamut of different types of government. Early Athenian lawgivers include Draco, who lived for about 50 years from 650 BCE to 600 BCE. It is from his name we get the term draconian. Does anybody know what the term draconian means? It means overly harsh or cruel. If I ran a country or a city-state, I was the king or whatever, and I said, okay, here's rule. If you have bad handwriting, we chop off your hand. If you steal a loaf of bread, that's a death sentence. Those rules are draconian. They're overly harsh. So you may come across this word draconian. If there's a law, maybe in North Korea, stealing a head of cabbage is a death sentence. That's a draconian law. Draco sometimes is used in literature to denote somebody that is overly cruel. Can you think of an example of anybody named Draco in literature you're familiar with?
Draco Malfoy.
Yep, Draco Malfoy from Harry Potter. Draco, up until the very end, where I guess there's some degree of redemption, he's cruel. He's just mean. And so that name is not an accident. Shortly after him, Solon ruled Athens, but it's Cleisthenes I want to talk about. This guy is our hero. He's going to come into power about 550 BCE in Athens. By 508, he has given Athens democracy. He writes down on paper, on a scroll, the first ever written constitution providing for a democratic government. Cleisthenes in 508 BC is the reason the concept of democracy exists at all. And so democracy is a gift of the Greeks. The idea that citizens in a city, in a polis, can vote, that they have ownership of how they live and how they're ruled, that they have the right to consent to how they're governed. These are all ideas that exist in Greece, in Athens, will exist temporarily in Rome, and then will disappear until the 18th century. Really until the United States and some other cultures begin to develop this concept again. So Cleisthenes and the Greeks around 508 BCE, thank you very much. And for those of you who think, oh, that's fantastic, I love democracy, there is nothing you saw recently that represents democracy, I'm sure. Anybody watch the debates last night? Or the debate? Oh my goodness. I don't care which side you were rooting for. Nobody, you can't, it isn't, that's not a presidential debate. It was not. I don't even care if you liked one of the guys and you still do, that's great, but that was Cleisthenes was spinning in his grave last night thinking, what the hell? He was saying, that ain't not no democracy I wrote up. He didn't say it that way because that's not how the Greeks talked. All right, so let's move on from, to kind of this, more of this golden age of ancient Greece. And we've read about the Persians, about the Persian Empire, about how the Persians encroached upon other areas around them. And there's going to be a series of wars called the Persian Wars where Persia is trying to conquer Greece. They fail. And it's really neat because in each instance when they fail, somebody different in Greece, some different culture on the Greek peninsula, some different polis or city-state gets to play the role of the hero. And there are three, really significant battles during these Persian Wars. One is the Battle of Marathon. And the way legend has it is that the Persians invaded. And the invasion came at a place and time that kind of caught the Athenians by surprise. And so a message was sent with a messenger to Athens that, hey, the Persians are here. And this dude evidently ran 26 miles to Athens to deliver the message, and the Athenians were able to scramble and win the Battle of Marathon and repel the Persian attack. About 10 years later, the Persians attack at Thermopylae. Okay, Thermopylae forced the Persians to walk, to march to this very narrow mountain pass. And the great thing about something like that, a really narrow, it's like basically marching into a funnel, is that it doesn't matter if you outnumber your enemy 10-1. If you have to march to a really narrow area, the enemy can put itself in the middle of that really narrow area, and they only have to fight a small number of you at a time. And if you saw the movie The 300, it's about 300 Spartans that repelled an enormous army of about 10,000 Persians, okay, and held them off again. And then finally, there's a climactic naval battle. The Athenian navy wins the Battle of Salamis, and the Persians are repulsed. And this is going to allow a period of Greek culture where they can flourish because they're kind of left alone for a little while by virtue of these victories. And in Athens, it ushers in the golden age of Athens under the rule of this guy, Pericles. How many of you watched the video on Pericles last week? Anyway, we might watch it tonight anyhow. It's worth seeing. He's considered the greatest ruler in the history of Athens. He was very well educated. He made a lot of really great decisions. He had a lot of money to work with. He's the one that has the Parthenon built. He's pretty significant. Matter of fact, I think we're gonna go to that Pericles video here and watch that before we talk about these Greek philosophers. I'm excited to talk about Greek philosophy with you. So give me just a second here. This is not that long, but you guys hear that?
The Athenians were now looking for a leader who might fulfill their newfound sense of imperial glory. They found a man who seemed the perfect reflection of this new ideal. A man who would change the face of Athens forever. A man named Pericles.
It's probably not a more important figure in the history of classical Greece than Pericles. He was the leader of Athens at the height of its power and of its artistic achievement. He was the figure associated appropriately with bringing Athenian democracy to its climax, to its height.
But Pericles was no obvious democrat like Themistocles, for he had been born into one of Athens' most elite families. And perhaps because of his aristocratic origins, Pericles knew what the people of Athens now wanted. A city fit to rule an empire.
It seems clear that Pericles had in mind to create a city whose greatness would be admired by the people who lived there, by everybody else in the Greek world, well into the future.
Pericles announced a glorious new vision to the Athenian assembly.
All kinds of enterprises should be created which will provide inspiration for every art, find employment for every hand. We must devote ourselves to acquiring things that will be the source of everlasting fame.
Pericles was not simply concerned with astonishing construction projects. Under his leadership, Athens would also become the intellectual center of the ancient world.
Pericles was remarkable in that he associated with the leading minds of his day in just about every field of endeavor.
In these years, Pericles played host to an astonishing generation of individuals. Figures such as Anaxagoras, the first man to realize that the moon was lit by reflected sunlight. He knew Herodotus, the world's first historian, who wrote one of the earliest records of Greek life. And poets and authors such as Aeschylus and Euripides, whose works are still standards of world literature. Pericles was well aware of his city's stature.
Our whole city is an education. For our citizens excel all men in versatility, resourcefulness, and brilliance.
Even Pericles' partner, a woman named Aspasia, was unique and distinguished. Pericles had divorced his wife and set up home with a foreign woman, a woman whose occupation was hardly to be expected. For Aspasia was what was known as a hetaira, Greek for a companion.
Yes, she was, in a technical sense, I guess, a prostitute, but she was more than that, a woman of charm, of style, of intellect. She really was very extraordinary. She had an extraordinary mind.
This relationship caused scandal throughout Athens, not just because of Aspasia's profession, but because Pericles treated her as an equal, something deeply unusual in 5th century Athens.
One of the things that created such a stir was that Pericles had her participate in conversations that he had with some of the most important individuals with whom he talked. There's jokes to suggest that Aspasia actually was the person who wrote Pericles' speeches.
Pericles and his circle were to become one of the most famous and influential groups in Western history. But in 5th century Athens, the highest achievements of art and culture were not restricted to the elite.
Pericles in Athens seems to me to belong in the smallish collection of cities where truly great moments in the human experience took place. Culture in the broadest sense reaches a peak.
But after 20 years of building the cultural capital of the Western world, Pericles and his fellow Athenians would now find that their theatre and their tragedies would hold a bitter sting.
It is possible to think of Pericles, indeed I think of him, as a man with a tragic flaw, as the sort of man whose greatest qualities, the ones that make him most admirable and successful, turn out to be the seeds of his own destruction.
Pericles began to plan a grand new venture. A venture even more ambitious than the Parthenon. He wanted to make Athens the undisputed leader of the Mediterranean. Little did Pericles know that he would now bring Athens not glory, but death, destruction, and the loss of her empire.
That whole video.
So, Pericles is a guy I always admired a great deal. If for no other reason, his quote that our city is education. Okay, as a teacher, you gotta love that. You gotta like a leader that emphasized art, architecture, and someone that valued the input and contributions from a diverse group of people, including the woman that was talked about quite a bit in there. And so that's something that was not usual for the time. But this period of Athens, Pericles overlaps with philosophers you're familiar with, Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. And the great thing about Athens in Greece at this time is Athens as a culture was all about learning, figuring stuff out, thinking about what makes the world work, thinking about, what makes humanity. Socrates is admired by a lot of people, and he should be. He was not the first teacher, but he's the one that tells us to question everything, and that only pursuing goodness brings happiness. He taught the youth of Athens that he encountered to question everything. And he actually taught by asking questions. It's called the Socratic method. It's a lot easier if I'm with a live classroom of people, but a lot of times, I don't talk more than a couple minutes without asking a question to move the discussion further. But it's hard on Zoom because, it's difficult to get motivated to participate. But Socrates would say that the best way to teach somebody something is by asking them questions, largely until they answer, they teach themselves what the answer is. Unfortunately, Socrates was charged with corrupting the youth of Athens because as part of his teachings, he was largely telling them that they should abandon the gods, that, Zeus, Poseidon, Hera, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Apollo, those guys, they're not going to give you answers. You've got to examine things for yourself. You've got to ask questions. You've got to have an inquiring mind. You've got to pursue these things on your own. And for that reason, he was found guilty of corrupting the youth of Athens and sentenced to death. How was he executed? Who knows? They made him drink hemlock. They basically made him drink a poison drink. So basically, they made him commit suicide. Now, his student was a philosopher named Plato. Plato establishes the academy. It's a school in Athens. He kind of begins to try to sort out how the universe is structured. He's wrong about just about everything, but it gets people thinking about it. He also writes in something called the Republic about the concept of what we'll call a philosopher king. I want you to think about this for a second. Plato was trying to theorize what the best type of government was. He is well familiar with Cleisthenes and the concept of democracy in Athens and Greece. But he says, what if there was a king, a philosopher king, somebody that was so enlightened, so well educated, so inspired that he made all the decisions. He was an absolute ruler, dictator, if you will. But every decision he made was the correct decisions, what was best for the largest number of people in his community. Would that guy, would that philosopher king then be an acceptable leader if we knew that every decision he made was going to be the best possible decision for everyone? And so I guess I pose the question, is a philosopher king a legitimate and acceptable leader if he is preordained to always make the best decision for those that he governs? Or is one man having all the power never the correct form of government, regardless of who he is or what decisions he makes? Think for a second.
I think it's dangerous to have one strict leader because it prevents a lack of diversity in ideas and creates a one-minded system that can just lead people to be unhappy in general.
All right, so regardless of the decisions, that form of government as a system is flawed for that reason. Okay. Anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah, but you also have, you might possibly stumble across a vast majority of people being indecisive due to so many opinions, so many different mindsets that you never really come up with a strict decision to how you want to run a certain country or place.
So you think that a philosopher king would be acceptable because he wouldn't be held back, or?
Well, the nature of a philosopher is to question everything in the first place.
Absolutely.
So So a dictator, king, leader, a person who was put in charge, who was a philosopher, is most likely the best option in a room full of people. If he's the only philosopher, because he's most likely questioning things others are.
Okay, I see what you're saying there. All right, you make a good point. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Being able to find that golden mean, or what was it?
Well, the golden mean, you're jumping ahead to Aristotle. Everything in moderation.
Yes, and finding that middle ground for everybody to essentially be happy.
Okay. What about, first, let me ask you, there's this concept of like a team of rivals. Abraham Lincoln and Dwight Eisenhower are real famous for this, where they would acknowledge that they have the power of the final word, but inviting diverse ideas from people they knew would disagree with them helped them make the most informed decision. So it does include a lot of the elements Paige mentioned, but also takes out of it the idea that there's an indecisiveness. If you have a strong enough leader, in my experience, the stronger the leader, the more willing he or she is to accept input from diverse groups of people, understanding at the end it's their decision. Doesn't that kind of balance both pretty well?
I think in theory it works, but what happens is someone tyrannical, someone takes advantage of that power and then uses it to create a tyrannical government that then displeases the entire population as a whole.
All right, so you're more concerned with a dictator taking over because we've given up too much power. All right. Ferris, you don't have fear of one-person rule? Or are you more about the efficiency?
Not if the one person is experienced in making decisions. I mean, you can.
Okay, you're kind of coming in and out with me. I don't know.
Had to make harsh decisions in their life.
Okay.
What's up?
Your audio for me is kind of coming in and out. It sounds a little robotic, and I'm missing parts. It's like when you had like a 1999 cell phone, you were driving to a tunnel.
One person.
But what I got out, I guess my question would be, okay, so we have our philosopher king, which okay, you're okay with, provided it's an individual that is enlightened and brilliant and makes these positive decisions, and I get that. I guess under that form of, you're kind of going in again. I don't know if it's on my end or my computer. Type something brilliant in the chat. We'll come back to you. But anyhow, so Plato gives us this idea really to get us thinking about this. And we will, after we talk about Julius Caesar and the Romans in a couple of weeks, actually have a discussion board on D2L where we're going to kick this around more, and that'll allow you to kind of fill out ideas. But this is kind of start getting you thinking about it. And, you know, for those of you that gave some input there, I do appreciate it a great deal. Let's move on here from Plato to Aristotle. And we did, Links gave us the idea of the golden mean. Aristotle is a student of Plato. He establishes a school in Athens called the Lyceum. He gives the concept of the golden mean, everything in moderation. And Aristotle is also considered the father of logic, as well as the scientific method. So if you ever do a science fair in high school, you can thank Aristotle. It's his fault. And when it comes to logic, Aristotle creates something called a syllogism. I like these. These are fun. The syllogism, expressed kind of mathematically, basically states if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. All dogs have 4 legs. Rover is a dog. Therefore, Rover has 4 legs. All birds have 2 legs and wings. A dove is a bird. Therefore, a dove has 2 legs and wings. Reptiles do not have fur. A crocodile is a reptile. Therefore, crocodiles do not have fur. So a syllogism is simply an expression of logic, basically kind of an if-then thing. If A equals B and if B equals C, then A also equals C. You understand that? Pretty simple. Aristotle's brilliant, but he's not complicated. The Greeks invent drama. They invent, they're famous for building amphitheaters, large, areas to perform plays. Some of the famous playwrights, the dramatists, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. This is where we get really weird Greek stories like Oedipus, a guy who killed his father and married his mother, and it's a little nifty little thing. The sciences, Pythagorean geometry. I imagine some of you remember the Pythagorean theorem from high school geometry class. Elizabeth, do you remember the Pythagorean theorem?
Yes, I remember hearing about it, but I've been out of high school for a very long time.
So have I. It's one of the few things I remember from geometry class. How you figure out the hypotenuse of a right triangle. It's fun stuff. It's how you can calculate how far the throw is from third base to first base. So what's the Pythagorean theorem? Somebody.
Is that a squared plus b squared equals c squared?
Yep, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So yeah, absolutely. Very good. Somebody learned something in high school. Woohoo! Democritus gives us this great idea. All matter is made up of small atoms. Imagine being able to come up with that idea before you could see an atom. Okay, just creating this idea that there's atomic structure that, you'll never believe an atom. They make up everything. Hippocrates is the father of medicine. That's why doctors take a Hippocratic oath. There's the Acropolis built under the guidance of Pericles. There's the Acropolis today. One of the places in Europe I very much want to go. Parthenon, a temple to the gods. There's the Agora. In the time of the Greeks, this Agora would have been the cultural and commercial center of the polis. This would align with tables and tents of people selling olives and grapes and wine and dates and figs and woven cloth. The Greeks really developed a huge textile industry. Weaving cloth was a huge part of their culture. But this is where they would sell those things. This is where you'd go shopping, but it's also where you'd walk along and talk to friends about current events, about history, about politics, about theology, about philosophy. And so the Agora was just really kind of the nerve center of the polis where, this open discussion of ideas took place. I don't know that we really have that today. Is there a place where, we don't gather anywhere right now, but is there a place where you could sit down with even a half dozen people and discuss and debate things today? Do those places still exist?
No.
School.
In theory, look, back before all this COVID nonsense, I'd show up about 4:45 for a 6 o'clock class. And, I'd probably eat something in the classroom where I'd be teaching, and I'd walk around a little bit. And, there were always students grouped together at tables or on, couch type furniture. And, they were doing schoolwork, but a lot of times the discussions were very energetically intellectual. And so, school was a place for something like that. When you're older and you're a nerd like me, if you have a social gathering, a Christmas party or St. Patty's party, a lot of this stuff happens. There'll be, groups of people, 6 people off in a corner talking about history or philosophy or theology or whatever. I hang out with people a lot smarter than me. That way I get smart too. I see people a lot of times gathered at Starbucks talking about stuff. There's a group of the Starbucks up the street from me of old men that get together there every Saturday morning, and they just sit there and talk for like 4 hours. They got nothing else to do, but it's an exchange like that. And when they aren't allowed to sit inside Starbucks and do that, they bring long chairs and sit outside on a Saturday morning. It looks like they're tailgating before a Penn State game. Okay, they got their chairs, they got little umbrellas and tents set up, and they sit there and drink coffee and bullshit for 4 hours. But that's basically a modern agora. So that type of thing is needed. That's kind of the lifeblood of a community. here we see some interesting things. It was labeled the classical Greek ideal. And I want you to imagine this, because in Europe, the Greeks will create art like this, and the Romans as well. These look like people, right? I mean, yeah, the artist might be making up muscles that don't really exist. I don't know, but yeah, these are people. And the really weird thing is, after the fall of Rome in 476, art like this disappears for like 800 years. And in Western Europe, nobody creates anything that looks human for 800 years. It's like we forget how. The Greeks, as artists, were able to depict the human form in sculpture. The Romans did too. They could do it on pottery as well. It's the Greeks that invent the ancient Olympics. There's the Athens Summer Olympics in 2004. The first modern Olympic Games in 1896 were held in Athens as well, because the Greeks had invented the Olympic Games. Now, the antithesis of Athens in ancient Greece was Sparta. Sparta had to control this whole area, okay? And the Spartans were outnumbered by the cultures around them about 10-1. So the Spartans decided if they wanted to maintain control and not get overrun and not have, you know, their culture destroyed, they were going to have to develop a culture that made them bigger, stronger, faster, tougher than everybody else around them. And so over a century or so, they did that. If you ever talk to somebody and they say, wow, we stayed in this youth hostel on vacation, it was really Spartan, means it was bare minimum. A Spartan existence means living a disciplined, with very little type of comfort. In Sparta, when you were born, if you were a healthy baby, you were good to go. If you were unhealthy, they took you out in the countryside and left you on a hill somewhere for wolves to eat. If you were a male, when you were 7, you were taken from your family and sent to live with a dude that would train you on how to be physically strong and physically fast and physically quick and be a good soldier and be a good fighter. And then when you were 20, you were put in the army. And then you were 30, you became a citizen. Okay, and you had a voice in the Spartan assembly where you got to vote on matters of importance, but you were always a soldier. You lived in a barracks, which basically had a bed and some personal belongings, and that was it. If you were a woman, you were free to walk about Sparta. You didn't need a male escort. You had quite a bit of freedom. You could, spend your own money and own your own property, but you were also expected to be married and then do what your husband told you. But the Spartans are this very warlike, warrior-like people. That's why so many high schools and colleges have, Spartan as their mascot. It's supposed to, strike fear into people that you are some kind of really intense warrior. It's these helots, by the way, that the Spartans were trying to control. But everything you see in Sparta is war helmets and armor and war. Now, eventually, there's going to be a series of wars between Athens and Sparta. These two dominant cultures on the Greek peninsula are going to come into conflict with one another. Generally, the Athenians have the better navy and better strategy, but the Spartans are better fighters, just hand-to-hand combat. And so, these pitched battles go back and forth throughout history. The thing that brings it all to an end is that this guy named Philip of Macedonia is in the northern part of Greece, is going to conquer significant areas and start to bring the area under his control. You can see the purplish area here that was conquered by Philip of Macedonia. It's a decent sized little empire. It's cute. It's a cute empire. It's a le petit empire. And I say that not to make fun of Philip. He's an okay dude. But it's his son that's going to have the enormous empire. Who's the son of Philip of Macedonia?
Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great is going to put together very quickly, I'm going to say, the most impressive empire in history. With all due respect to the British Empire of the late 19th century or the Roman Empire or anything else, considering how quickly Alexander puts together this empire and how large it is and how diverse it is, Here is Alexander the Great's empire. It includes all of Greece, all of Asia Minor, most of Egypt, large portions of the Middle East, okay, Mesopotamia, and then all the way into India, okay, and the Ganges River Valley, and this is impressive in size and scope, considering he conquered all this territory before he was 30 years old. That's impressive. It makes me at the age of 56 feel really inadequate. I haven't conquered anything. Your summary didn't have a lot about Alexander the Great, did it? Just at the very end, it mentioned him, right? We got to spend a little time with him here coming up. He's brilliant. By the way, he's answered a lot of trivia questions too, including the name of his horse, which was Bucephalus. It's a great name for a horse. If I were a horse, I think I'd name him Bucephalus. I don't know what the hell I would do with a horse, by the way, but maybe you're a horse person. Nobody? Okay. I'm not going to cover. All right, let's break for a second here and go to one of our Alexander the Great. I apologize, this is John Green, but I really want you to get some stuff about Alexander the Great here, because while this ends up being the ultimate end of Greece's moment in the sun, it is a glorious one. The idea that one man that quickly at that young age conquered that much territory and brought a diverse group of items into the Greek realm, different types of fruits and spices and animal skins and things like that is just really awesome. So let's see if we can't make this function. Alexander the Great.
Hey there, my name is John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about Alexander the Great. But to do that, we're going to begin by talking about ideals of masculinity and heroism and Kim Kardashian and the situation. Mr. Green, Mr. Green, Mr. Green. Which situation? Oh, me from the past. I forgot you wanted to go to Columbia. Me from the present regrets to inform you that you do not get in. But since you live in the past, you have no way of knowing who I'm talking about. And it occurs to me that this video may be watched in some glorious future when Kim Kardashian and the situation have mercifully disappeared from public life, and the supermarket tabloids, instead of talking about celebrities, talk about Foucault and the Higgs boson particle. So Kim Kardashian is a professional famous person who initially rose to notoriety by scootily pooping with someone named Ray J, and Mike, the situation, I forgot his last name, is a professional stupid person with big muscles. They're both known by millions, live in luxury, and people literally pay to own their odors. Why do these people crave fame? Why do any of us? Well, I'd argue it's not about money. If it were, our tabloids would be devoted to the lives and times of bankers. I think we all want to leave a legacy. We want to be remembered. We want to be great. For a long time, history was all about the study of great men, and it was common to call people the great, although these days historians are less likely to do that because they recognize that one man's great is generally another man's terrible. And also the great has some misogynistic implications, like it's almost always men who are called the great. You never hear of Cleopatra the Great or Elizabeth the Great. Sure, there's Catherine the Great of Russia, but for her masculine greatness, she was saddled with the completely untrue rumor that she died trying to scootily poop with a horse. Saddled? Get it? Anybody? Saddled with the rumor. Anyway, they could have soiled Catherine the Great's name just by telling the truth, which is that, like so many other great men and women, she died on the toilet. Get it? Soiled. Toilet. Yes. Yes. So, quick biography of Alexander of Macedon. Born in 356 BCE, died in 323 BCE at the ripe old age of 32. Alexander was the son of King Philip II, and when just 13 years old, he tamed a horse no one else could ride named Bucephalus, which impressed his father so much that he said, "O thy son, look thee out at a kingdom equal to and worthy of thyself for Macedonia is too little for thee. By that time, he was already an accomplished general, but over the next decade, he expanded his empire with unprecedented speed, and he is famous for having never lost a battle. Today, we're going to look at Alexander of Macedon's story by examining 3 possible definitions of greatness. First, maybe Alexander was great because of his accomplishments. This is an extension of the idea that history is the record of the deeds of great men. Now, of course, that's ridiculous. For one thing, half of people are women. For another, and this is important, there are lots of historical events that no one can take responsibility for, like, for instance, the Black Plague. Still, Alexander was accomplished. I mean, he conquered a lot of territory, like, a lot. His father Philip had conquered all of Greece, but Alexander did what the Spartans and the Athenians had failed to do. He destroyed the Persian Empire. He conquered all the land the Persians had held, including Egypt, and then marched toward India, stopping at the Indus River only because his army was like, hey, Alexander, you know what would be awesome? Not marching. Also, Alexander was a really good general, although historians disagree over whether his tactics were truly brilliant or if his army just happened to have better technology, specifically these extra long spears called sarissas. But much of his reputation as a general and his reputation in general, anybody? Puns? Maybe I should stop? Okay. Is because of Napoleon. Napoleon, like many other generals through the millennia, was obsessed with Alexander the Great, but more on that in a moment. That said, Alexander wasn't very good at what we might now call empire building. Alexander's empire is definitely visually impressive, but it wasn't actually much of an empire. Like, Alexander specialized in the tearing down of things, but he wasn't so great at the building up of institutions to replace the things he'd torn down. And that's why pretty soon after his death, his empire broke into 3 empires called the Hellenistic kingdoms. Each was ruled by one of Alexander's generals, and they became important dynasties: the Antigonids in Greece and Macedonia, the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Persia, all of which lasted longer than Alexander's empire itself. A second kind of greatness, maybe Alexander was great because he had an enormous impact on the world after his death. Like King Tut, Alexander the Great was amazingly good at being a dead person. Let's go to the thought bubble. So after Alexander of Macedon died, everyone, from the Romans to Napoleon to Oliver Stone, loved him, and he was an important military model for many generals throughout history. But his main post-death legacy may be that he introduced the Persian idea of absolute monarchy to the Greco-Roman world, which would become a pretty big deal. Alexander also built a number of cities on his route that became big deals after his death, and it's easy to spot them because he named most of them after himself and one after his horse. The Alexandrian Egypt became a major center of learning in the classical world and was home to the most amazing library ever, which Julius Caesar probably accidentally burned down while trying to conquer a bunch of land to emulate his hero, Alexander the Great. Plus, the dead Alexander had a huge impact on culture. He gave the region its common language, Greek, which facilitated conversations and commerce. Greek was so widespread that archaeologists have found coins in what is now Afghanistan with pictures of their kings with the word king written beneath the pictures in Greek. This is also why, incidentally, the New Testament was eventually written in Greek. Although Alexander was mostly just conquering territory for the glory and heroism and greatness of it all, in his wake emerged a more closely connected world that could trade and communicate with more people more efficiently than ever before. Alexander didn't make those things happen, but they probably wouldn't have happened without him. But here's a question. If you're watching Jersey Shore and get so involved in the situation's romantic conquest that you leave the bathwater running, thereby flooding your apartment, and you have to call a plumber, and the plumber comes over and you fall in love with him and get married and live happily ever after, does that make the situation responsible for your marriage? Thanks, Thought Bubble. Okay, a third definition of greatness. Maybe Alexander is great because of his legend. Since no accounts of Alexander were written while he was alive, embellishment was easy. And maybe that's where true greatness lies. I mean, the guy died at 32 before he ever had a chance to get old and lose battles. He was tutored by Aristotle, for God's sakes. Then there's Alexander's single-minded, obsessive, Ahab-esque pursuit of the Persian king Darius, who he chased across modern-day Iraq and Iran for no real reason except that he desperately wanted to kill him. And when Bessus, one of Darius's generals, assassinated him before Alexander had the chance, Alexander chased Bessus around until he could at least kill him. These almost comical pursuits of glory and heroism are accompanied in classical history series by stories of Alexander walking through the desert and it's suddenly raining and these ravens coming to lead him to the army he's supposed to fight. And stories of his hot Persian wife Roxana, who while still a teenager engineered the assassination of many of Alexander's fellow wives. And even in his death, people tried to make Alexander live up to this heroic ideal. Like Plutarch tells us that he died of a fever, but that's no way for a masculine, empire-building, awesome person to die. So rumors persist that he died either of alcohol poisoning or else of assassination-y poisoning. I mean, no great man can die of a fever. Speaking of great men, it's time to strip down for the open letter. So elegant. But first, let's see what's in the secret compartment today. Oh, it's Kim Kardashian's perfume. Thanks, Stan. I'll wear this. I'll check it out. I'll give it a try. Wow, that is... It's like all the worst parts of baby powder and all the worst parts of cat pee. An open letter to the ladies. Hello, ladies. You've really been unfairly neglected in Crash Course World History and also in world history textbooks everywhere. Like, there will be a whole chapter exploring the exploits of great men, and then at the end there will be one sentence that's like, also, women were doing stuff at the time, and it was important, but we don't really know what it was. So back to Alexander the Great. History has been very good at marginalizing and demeaning women, and we're going to fight against that as we move forward in the story of human civilization. Ladies, I have to go now because my eyes are stinging from the biological weapon known as Kim Kardashian's gold. Seriously, don't wear it. Best wishes, John Green. So in Alexander the Great, we have a story of a man who united the world while riding a magical horse only he could tame across deserts where it magically rained for him so that he could chase down his mortal enemy and then leave in his wake a more enlightened world and a gorgeous, murderous wife. But of course, it's not just Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty that celebrate the idea that ennobled violence can lead to a better world. And that takes us to my opinion of how Alexander really came to be great. Millennia after his death in 1798, Napoleon invaded Egypt not because he particularly needed to invade Egypt, but because he wanted to do what Alexander had done. And long before Napoleon, the Romans really worshipped Alexander, particularly the Roman general Pompey, aka Pompeius Magnus, aka Pompey the Great. Pompey was so obsessed with Alexander that he literally tried to emulate Alexander's boyishly disheveled hairstyle. In short, Alexander is great because others decided he was great, because they chose to admire and emulate him. Yes, Alexander was a great general. Yes, he conquered a lot of land. The situation is also really good at picking up girls of a certain type. And Kim Kardashian is good at... Stan, what is Kim Kardashian good at? We made Alexander great, just as today we make people great when we admire them and try to emulate them. History has traditionally been in the business of finding and celebrating great men and only occasionally great women. But this obsession with greatness is troubling to me. It wrongly implies first that history is made primarily by men, and secondly that history is made primarily by celebrated people, which of course makes us all want to be celebrities. Thankfully, we've left behind the idea that the best way to become an icon is to butcher people and conquer a lot of land, but the ideals that we've embraced instead aren't necessarily worth celebrating either. All of which is to say, we decide what to worship and what to care about and what to pay attention to. We decide whether to care about the situation. Alexander couldn't make history in a vacuum, and neither can anyone else. Thanks for watching. I'll see you.
John Green does love to get on his soapbox as well as teach history there. So regarding Alexander the Great, he brings up some good points about his greatness and whether it's based on what he conquered or whether it's based on, you know, what he accomplished and whether, you know, the cultural windfall, or whether it's, you know, historians and other people that came after him that made him great. He mentions two other things in there. The most important which I want to address is this whole idea of a gender imbalance in history. Do you find that to be true when you studied history in high school and stuff? Did it seem like it was all men all the time?
Seems that way.
Well, there's two reasons for that. Number one, there is a certain degree of bias. But number two, because women were marginalized by entire cultures, it meant that the men were the only ones that got the opportunity to make history in many cases. Now, I think you'll find throughout this semester that we don't do that. You know, your second assigned reading was all about Hatshepsut. We highlighted her as a pharaoh of Egypt. Coming up in a couple of weeks when we talk about Vietnam, we're going to talk about the Trung sisters. Kirsten, do you remember the Trung sisters in the Vietnam War class? And so if you say yes, I'm not going to follow up with any questions about it. But you know, there are two readings about the Trung sisters. You know, I make an effort to give where credit where credit is due, so we have some degree of balance here in our discussion of these events and time periods. All right, so we've largely covered Greece, and I covered it a little more quickly than I normally do because, in theory, you know, most of you said you watched that, you know, Greek culture in 17 minutes video last week, so I see no need to replay that, although it is on D2L. You're welcome to revisit it if you like. I do want to talk a little bit more about Greek mythology because I want to tie in some really specific things that relate to Greek culture. Are you familiar with the Greek pantheon? In other words, like the 12 Olympian gods? All right, so let's start this way. Okay, kind of. Okay, that's a very fair answer. King of the gods in Greek mythology is who?
Zeus.
Zeus. Yep, that's Zeus. All right, so Zeus has 4 other brothers and sisters: Poseidon, Hades, Hera, and Hestia. Hera he ends up marrying because, you know, royalty likes to keep things in the family, and in a lot of mythologies we'll find out the king of the gods is married to his sister, and you know, that's just the way it is. Poseidon's the god of the sea, Hades the god of the underworld, you know, Hestia is the goddess of the hearth and home, and you know, Hera's queen of the gods. And then children of Zeus include Ares, who's the god of war, Athena, who interestingly enough was born by bursting out of Zeus's skull, full grown and in battle armor, and she's the goddess of wisdom and defensive strategy and warfare and weaving. Very odd combination. Poseidon, by the way, is the god of the sea, but he's also the one that gave horses to men. And so there's one particular story from Greek mythology I want to share with you because it goes with something I mentioned earlier. There's a story about Athena and a woman named Arachne. Arachne was a woman who was a weaver. She was able to weave thread into cloth better than just about anybody in all of Greece. She had a fantastic reputation. Her cloth sold for very high prices at the Agora, and the rumor was she could weave better than anybody. And she one time very boastfully made the statement that she could weave even better than the goddess Athena herself. And so one day while she was in her shop weaving, this old woman showed up and said, "Wow, you're quite good at weaving." And Arachne again made the boast that I'm better than even the goddess Athena. The old woman said, "Well, I don't think that's true because I don't even think you're better than me." And Arachne scoffed and said, "Bring it on, old woman. I'll take you on in a weaving contest." And the old woman outwove her and then revealed herself to be the goddess of Athena, and then to punish Arachne for her pridefulness and boasting, turned her into a spider. Why a spider?
Spider weaves web.
Yeah, spiders weave webs. There's that connection that way. What is the scientific name for spiders? Yeah, they're called arachnids, okay, because of Arachne from that story. And so we use that Greek story to even develop our scientific classification for spiders. And this story is about weaving because, as I mentioned when I talked about that Agora, woven cloth was something that was a great export for the Greeks. And so this ties a lot of elements about boastfulness and humility, about pride, about, you know, the importance of weaving in Greek culture all together into one story. And so anytime you hear myths or legends from a culture, they're more than just stories. They reflect things about the culture. And Athena is one of the most super and respected deities in Greek mythology, even more so than a lot of the men. She creates that sense of, you know, almost an equality about male and female roles in Greek culture, because in a lot of places there was a large degree of equality like that. All right, I do want to go to one more video clip here that has to do with Greek mythology. And then one or two things yet here. Let me see if I can find it. Evidently, I cannot find it. Why can I not find it? There it is.
In this video, we'll explore the 10 most powerful Greek gods. Number 10, Hermes. Hermes is a god of...
Is the sound coming through there?
Yes, it's pretty loud.
Okay.
Of transitions and boundaries, and is described as quick and cunning. He could move between the worlds of the mortal and divine. He's also portrayed as an emissary and messenger of the gods, the conductor of souls into the afterlife. He's basically the Flash made into a Greek god. He's super fast and even moves between dimensions, as he's been in the underworld and Olympus. In some myths, he's a trickster and outwits other gods for his own satisfaction, or for the sake of humankind. Number 9, Aphrodite. Aphrodite is the goddess of love, beauty, pleasure, and procreation, identified with the planet Venus. According to Hesiod's Theogony, she was born when Cronus cut off Uranus's genitals and threw them into the sea, and she arose from the sea foam. Because of her beauty, other gods feared that their rivalry over her would interrupt the peace and lead to war, so Zeus married her to Hephaestus. Hephaestus was friend-zoned due to being extremely ugly and was not seen as a threat. Number 8, Hephaestus. No, not the liver disease hepatitis. Hephaestus is the Greek god of blacksmiths, metallurgy, fire, and volcanoes. In Greek mythology, Hephaestus was the son of Zeus and Hera. In another version, he was rejected by his mother because of his deformity and expelled from heaven and down to earth. As a smithing god, Hephaestus made all the weapons of the gods in Olympus. He served as a blacksmith of the gods and was worshipped in the industrial centers like Athens. Hephaestus' symbols are a smith's hammer, anvil, and a pair of tongs. Number 7, Artemis. Artemis was one of the most widely venerated of the ancient Greek deities. Her Roman equivalent is Diana. Artemis was often described as the daughter of Zeus and Leto and twin sister of Apollo. She was the Hellenic goddess of the hunt, wild animals, virginity, and protector of young girls. As a virgin, Artemis had interested many gods and men, but only her hunting companion, Orion, won her heart. Orion was accidentally killed either by Artemis or by Gaia. In later Hellenistic times, she even assumed the ancient role of Ilithyia in aiding childbirth. Number 6, Ares. Ares is the Greek god of war. He's one of the 12 Olympians and the son of Zeus and Hera. In Greek literature, he often represents the violent aspect of war, in contrast to his sister, the armored Athena, whose functions as a goddess of intelligence include military strategy. The Greeks were ambivalent towards Ares. Although he embodied the physical valor necessary for winning wars, he was considered to be a dangerous force. The counterpart of Ares among the Roman gods is Mars, who was given a more dignified place as a guardian deity. Number 5, Apollo. Now you know where Apollo Creed got his name. He was one of the most important of the Olympian deities. Apollo has been variously recognized as a god of music, truth, and prophecy, healing, the sun and light, plague, poetry, and more. Apollo is the son of Zeus and Leto. Medicine and healing are associated with Apollo, yet he was also seen as a god who could bring ill health and deadly plague. Apollo also functioned as a patron god of music and poetry. Hermes created the lyre for him, and the instrument became a common attribute of Apollo. Number 4, Hades. Hades was the ancient Greek god of the underworld and god of the dead and riches. In Greek mythology, Hades was regarded as the oldest son of Cronus and Rhea. He and his brothers, Zeus and Poseidon, defeated their father's generation of gods. Hades received the underworld, Zeus the air, and Poseidon the sea. The solid earth, long the province of Gaia, was available to all three concurrently. Hades was often portrayed with his three-headed guard dog, Cerberus, and later associated with the Helm of Darkness. Number 3. Athena. Athena is the goddess of war strategy, the arts, and skill in ancient Greek religion and mythology. Athena is known for her calm temperament as she moves slowly to anger. She is noted to have only fought for just reasons and would not fight without a purpose. According to mythical lore, she competed with Poseidon and she won by creating the olive tree. The Athenians would accept her gift and name the city after her. In history, the citizens of Athens built a statue of Athena as a temple to the goddess. Number 2. Zeus. Zeus was the sky and thunder god who ruled as king of the gods of Mount Olympus. Zeus is the child of Cronus and Rhea, the youngest of his siblings to be born, though sometimes said to be the eldest, as the others required disgorging from Cronus' stomach. Zeus was also infamous for his erotic escapades. These resulted in many godly offspring, including Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, Heracles, Helen of Troy, and many others. He was respected as an all-father who was chief of the gods and assigned the others to their roles. And number 1. Poseidon. Poseidon is the god of the sea and is often referred to as Earthshaker due to his role in causing earthquakes. In some tales, he was saved by his mother, Rhea, who concealed him among a flock of lambs and pretended to have given birth to a colt, which was devoured by Kronos. Poseidon was a major civic god of several cities. In Athens, he was second only to Athena in importance, while in Corinth, he was the chief god of the polis. In his benign aspect, Poseidon was seen as creating new islands and offering calm seas. Thank you for watching Mega Top 10s. Please subscribe.
Now, nowhere in that video does it say they're listing them really in order, but if you're going to have a top 10 Greek gods, I don't know how Zeus isn't number 1. All right, so look, I want to look ahead here to next week. So, you know, we're basically a week behind, and like I said, I'll post a new document on D2L that shows all the adjustments, so you don't have to keep like mentally drawing lines down from each one. The reading is a little more complicated, and that's one reason why I was kind of happy that we're resetting the clock here. It's about India and about China. And a large focus of the reading and of our discussions is going to be religion. I mean, it has been to a degree already, but, you know, in Indian culture, it's going to talk about Brahmanism, Jainism, and Hinduism. In Chinese culture, it's going to talk about Buddhism and Confucianism and Taoism. All right, and sometimes these can be confusing. We are, for the most part, kind of Eurocentric in our study of world history and religion and myth and so forth. And I want to spend time next week trying to get and create an understanding of these Eastern religions. So as you read, I'd like you to do me, if I'm making a suggestion, because this will make your life easier, you know, kind of list those 6 religions: Brahmanism, Jainism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, and kind of create a list of, okay, here's, you know, the beliefs, here's, you know, some of the vocab, here's some of the beliefs under each one. Because I think what next week what I'm going to start with is using the breakout rooms to have you guys kind of break this down a little bit so we can have this discussion. I want to spend the time and effort creating an understanding of these Eastern religions because they predate Christianity, they predate Islam, and, you know, a very large part of the world's population are adherents to these religious beliefs today. So they merit our time and energy. So spend a little extra time, you know, kind of being able to categorize the things that go into these religions. Brahmanism, Jainism, and Hinduism are primarily Indian. Confucianism, Buddhism and Taoism are primarily Chinese. They do cross over. There are adherents to these philosophies or religions, you know, in the Western world as well. But in their origins, that's what we're talking about. If you read that, please reread it, and that'll dominate our discussion next week. Next week's quiz is, you know, anything in the PowerPoint, anything in the reading, anything in our discussion, anything in the videos about Greece is fair game. But the quiz next week to start class is all Greece all the time. I will tell you this, you know, I'll probably start posting the quiz to be open like all day Tuesday and into Wednesday, just so that I keep getting emails popping up here. So that if there's any issue, you're not so bracketed by time. If we decide we're going to start class, you know, it's something you can revisit, and I'll reset it so you got more than one shot at it, just to make sure everybody's accommodated. Any questions on that? All right, so yeah.
I'm sorry, we can take it as early as Tuesday if we.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna have it up from noon Tuesday to noon Thursday.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I figure I owe you guys that. You know, normally we make it to a little after 8 at least. We're probably gonna roll it to a close here shortly because there's a couple people I need to get with about some tech issues, and you guys heard during that last video and starting to cough a little bit more, so we're just gonna wind it down. We have the luxury of time. All right, so next week is going to be, I think, a really interesting class, because I think while a lot of you sat here tonight thinking, I remember learning some of this in middle school or high school or whatever about the Greeks, you know, I'm pretty sure, you know, unless your school had a really stellar world history curriculum, that talking about Jainism and Hinduism in India and talking about Confucianism and legalism in China is going to be new information for you. And a lot of it really is interesting. I'm not trying to sell you on any of it, but I'm just saying that I think you're going to find it interesting, especially when we talk about what that tells us about how those cultures emerge differently from some of the ones we've talked about so far. You guys have any questions about anything? Cool. All right, unless you have something specific to discuss here with me, you are free to move about the country. Have a great week, and we'll have a robust class next Wednesday.
I feel better.
Bye. Oh, I'm on road to recovery, but thank you. Yes, we will continue to get better every day and in every way. Adios.
Mr. Mayo, I'm going to email you.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good.
All right.
All righty. So is there anybody here that needs tech help regarding the quizzes?
I just have a question.
Yes.
So I'll be like able to go back into like D2L and look at the stuff, right?
I would guess by some point tomorrow. I'm gonna send that in tonight. They sent me a form I had to fill out. The only thing I gotta go back and look at my syllabus and get the CRN number for the course. It's the only thing I didn't have other than your ID. And so I'll send that back tonight via email. And
where do I find the CRN number?
The CRN number is the course number. And I don't remember it off the top of my head. I'm not talking History 101. I'm talking there's like a specific number for this section of the course. So just to go back and find it on my syllabus so I can put that number on the form. That has nothing to do with you. I'll send that. I'll send that in tonight, and then I don't know whether somebody will get to it at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning or 11:30 tomorrow morning, but sometime tomorrow you should find you have access to everything again.
Okay. Vicky sent me a form too. Should I fill that out? It says I need to get an academic dean signature. Where do I get that at?
I don't know. I mean, I'm filling out the thing on my end that I got from the history department chair that I contacted. All I do is fill out the form and I get you added back to the class. So I don't know if you still need to do anything or not.
Okay. Well, I'll email Vicky then.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good night.
Good night.